just realized I was muted. Sorry, everyone. So welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today for a lunch break with Achieve Minneapolis. It was wonderful to see so many friends and supporters of Achieve sign up for today's event. My name is Danielle Grant, if you don't know me, and for the last 5 years, I have had the honor of serving as the president and CEO of Achieve Minneapolis. Today, you will be hearing about how things are going with our work with young people, particularly our work in our Minneapolis and St. Paul public schools with our career and college centers. You'll be hearing about our lessons learned and how they were informing our future work. And most importantly, and I think the reason many people have logged on today, you'll be hearing directly from our career and college center staff working with students. So I do invite you to submit questions at any time in the Q&A, and we will be answering as many as possible later on in our agenda. But first, let me give you a brief overview of who we are and what we do. So Achieve Minneapolis was formed almost 20 years ago by the merger of the Minneapolis Public Schools Foundation and a nonprofit called Youth Trust. We continue to serve as the foundation for Minneapolis Public Schools, raising funds for district priorities and managing school and department funds, scholarships, and awards. We also bring people together every year on issues of education and youth development through various thought leader events and convenings, and of course through our Ed Talk speaker series, in which we highlight issues and insights of interest in our community. In our program work, Achieve is centered on career and college readiness, and we have 2 major programs and 1 emerging program that I would like to briefly talk about today. The first program I want to touch on is Step Up, the summer youth employment program in the city of Minneapolis. We partner with the city of Minneapolis, Project for Pride in Living, and Career Force Minneapolis to provide workforce readiness training and paid summer internships for young people. Achieve primarily works with the older students aged 16 to 21, placing them in internships with about 200 private employers. Obviously, we have faced some pretty big challenges with Step Up in the last year, thanks to COVID. And I am pleased to share that our team and our partners have made some pretty amazing things happen over the last year. We switched things up to virtual internships and provided paid online professional development that continued to put money in young people's pockets during some pretty challenging times. In an ordinary year, Step Up interns earn approximately $3 million in wages. So helping students earn money in the last year by doing a great developmental experience was incredibly important, especially during these difficult times. So this year, our internship numbers are up, and there will be both online and some in-person internships. With over 29,000 alumni, Step Up is one of the, if not the, most successful internship program serving high school students in the country. The emerging program that I wanted to share about this morning is the Achieve College Internships. This is our attempt to take everything that we've learned in our long time experience with high school internships and expand it to college internships. We are working with the Minnesota Private College Fund to find internships for students in 2 of their scholarship programs, who are all African-American young men. And then this year, we have opened this up to some of our alumni, all of whom had successfully completed Step Up internships in high school. So we're learning a lot about the college internship landscape, even during these challenging times, and we're excited to continue to develop this model in the year ahead. Finally, our largest program is the Career and College Centers. Achieve has run career and college centers in Minneapolis Public Schools for over 15 years. We are currently in 11 high schools in Minneapolis, and 2 years ago, we were invited to open additional centers in St. Paul Public Schools, where we now have 4 CCCs. In our career and college centers, students are able to work one-on-one with professionals on career and college exploration, whether it be exploring different colleges and post-secondary programs, to helping with applications for financial aid and scholarships, to career exploration through career speakers, worksite tours, and informational interviews. All of this work was tremendously impacted by the pandemic and moved to virtual learning. So we're going to hear a lot more about this today, and I would now like to hand things over to Kendra Engels, our Director of School-Based Programs, to talk about this work, the lessons learned, and how we are moving forward. Kendra.
Great. Hello, everyone. Very nice to speak with you all today. As Danielle mentioned, my name is Kendra Engels. I'm the Director for School-Based Programs for AchieveMpls, which means that I oversee the Career and College Center programming and services in both Minneapolis and St. Paul high schools, as well as our career exploration and exposure work. And Danielle gave a very helpful overview of the work of the Career and College Centers. I'll just dive a little bit deeper on some of that to give you a little more context, and then switch to talking about how things have changed over the last year to 18 months. So our Career and College Centers are actual physical centers, actual spaces within our schools in normal times, and are staffed by a coordinator, one or more coordinators at our different schools. Those coordinators work alongside the counseling teams at their schools to really offer a wide array of services that support students as they develop their post-secondary plans, their hopes for the future, their interests and their kind of professional identities that they're hoping to pursue once they graduate from high school. So there's a lot of different types of supports and services that our staff provide, and those services span the whole course of their time in high school. So things from career exploration and interest exploration and things like that in the younger grades, moving into actually developing that post-secondary plan and deciding what are the steps that I need to take both in high school and after high school to pursue the career path that I'm interested in. And so those things, that advising happens through a lot of different formats. It can happen through one-on-one advising. It can happen through lessons. Both of the districts have career and college readiness curriculum that we support in delivering and implementing. There are workshops that happen and things like events that kind of larger group events that we hold to give students different opportunities to meet people in the community and explore different options that might be out there for them. So obviously all of these things were heavily impacted when COVID hit. We, as well as the rest of the school community, moved into remote learning and remote working. And I would say in those first months last spring, a lot of our efforts, as well as everyone else's efforts, went towards really checking in on students' socio-emotional well-being and trying to ensure that they had their basic needs met, that they and their families had their basic needs met. So that looked like trying to make sure that students had access to technology so that they could even log into school, making sure that they had basic needs met. Schools provide a lot of meals for families, and so making sure folks had food and had stable housing situations, and trying to connect people with resources if they didn't have those things. And so it was a lot of just really all hands on deck, trying to do an assessment of where everyone was at and support in the ways that we could to help families kind of make sense of the new situation we were all living in. And as that, as last year wrapped up and we moved into this year, we began to do, everyone sort of acclimated, I guess, as best we could to the new reality. And our coordinators really started focusing on how do you engage students well digitally in work that really is very individualized, it's very personal, it's very based on relationships. And it's definitely been it's been a challenge for everyone, students and staff alike. And but I think we've learned a lot of things over the course of this year and learned some different strategies. I think a lot of what we did was transition from, we learned pretty early on that things like, unfortunately, things like this, like live events, were really challenging actually for student engagement for a number of reasons. I mean, everyone had a lot of screen fatigue. Everyone was feeling a lot of burnout just from kind of managing the core expectations of the academic day. And so we switched from, focusing on things like those workshops and events to doing a lot more of that one-on-one advising and that one-on-one outreach. Of course, that also came with challenges because we can't, in a school building, if you're trying to reach a student, you can grab them in the hallway or meet them at lunch, or you can go into a classroom and pull them out of class to talk with them. None of those options were available in the virtual space, and it took a lot more It's taken a lot more just perseverance and persistence in trying to reach out to students through a number of different formats and you know, tech platforms. And you know, I think anyone who's worked in schools over this last year will tell you that virtual learning has really required just a lot more. It just takes a lot more time. It takes a lot more time and energy and outreach to reach the same number of students. And so our team has really been coordinating really closely with their school counseling teams to identify who are the students who need that really targeted outreach and who is the best person on that counseling team, including the coordinator, to you know, to be doing the outreach, who has the best relationship, who had a connection with the student at some other point in time. And so there's a lot of alignment and prioritization that's happening between the school-based team and our coordinators. Another thing that I would say that has shifted on the whole is that there's, I think that social emotional, you know, well-being and checking in that we did in those first months has really become more of a core part of the post-secondary advising generally. And it always was part of our approach to making sure that we were kind of working with students holistically and really understanding, you know, where they're at when we're trying to support them in advising. But in this context, it became even more critical because we needed to understand kind of all of the different things, all of the different pressures and things that were working on a student's decisions in order to be able to support them. I know at one of our schools, for example, they did a monthly, the coordinator organized a monthly session for seniors to, you know, where the thrust of it was to talk about their career and college readiness or their plans for their after high school pathways. But they spent a good chunk of the time actually just focusing on student wellness, talking about bringing in folks who could do different mindfulness practices and things like that, giving students space to share with one another, to connect with one another. As we all know, social connection has been so disrupted for all of us, and certainly for, you know, for teenagers, it's an even more acute need. And so we're really trying to build those things into our events and advising in a way that that maybe wasn't done in quite that intentional of a way before. Other things we've, of course, just as everyone has gotten much better at digital platforms, learning about Google Classrooms, learning about Zoom, about all of our coordinators have built websites for their schools so that there's kind of a centralized place that students can go to find resources without having to have a, you know, a set appointment and things like that. And then again, just so much, you know, so much legwork, so much outreach, so much kind of dogged perseverance to be reaching students and making sure that students and families have the information they need to make the decisions that they're going to need to make over these coming months. And then the last piece I would say is just the real, just want to name, and I'm sure that our coordinators will speak a bit to this as well, but I think I just want to name the challenge of trying to do post-secondary advising in this landscape where none of us really know what the world holds moving forward, and it's been a very I think it's been a challenge for anyone who's doing advising for students to have, you know, we never have the answers, but we like to think we have, like, you know, some informed guidance, and I think all of that has been called into question, and we don't really know, we can't say in the same way we could before, this is what this path means, or this is what this path means, because so many things have been disrupted and so many of our assumptions have been called into question. So it has been an interesting year. That's kind of a general overview. I want to, at this point, bring in our coordinators. So we have two coordinators joining us who have been doing this work on the ground for the last, you know, 18 months. And are going to be able to give you just a little bit more insight from their, you know, from their work day to day. So joining us today, we have Zoey Haines, who is coming from Central High School in St. Paul. And then we have Rodgers, who's joining us. He's one of the coordinators at Roosevelt High School in Minneapolis. So welcome to both of you. Thank you for joining. All right, and I have a few questions that I'm going to ask of them, and then there's, as Danielle mentioned, there's going to be time at the end for Q&A. So if there's questions that you're having come up as we're having this conversation, please put those in the chat so we can ask those questions later. So I'm going to start off with Zoey. Zoey, could you talk a little bit with us about what are some of the key ways that your work changed when we switched to remote learning?
Yes. So hi, everyone. Again, my name is Zoey Haines. I'm at Central High School in St. Paul. I took some notes because there are so many ways that this year changed. So trying to be concise. Kendra, you actually covered a lot of it, which is great. But just to touch on a few things, I think the biggest change for me was, and you kind of hinted at this, but just the difficulty in reaching and finding students. It was so exacerbated by being in the digital space, starting digitally this fall. I think I didn't realize how much I relied on word of mouth and on students like dragging their friends into the Career and College Center until I just didn't have that and couldn't rely on that. So it was a lot of just like being very persistent, being very repetitive in my communication, and just making sure that students know like where to find me, where the resources are. I think also this year, I relied on and was really grateful for some of the collaboration between like the teachers, the social workers, the counselors in directing students to the college and career space. So like they might be having a separate conversation and then they're like, hey, like, you know, I'm going to CC Miss Haines on an email with you, like, let's get you in touch because you need to be doing this work. So that I guess is kind of a plus. I think there was sort of increased collaboration because it was kind of forced. Like we all had to be flexible. We all had to collaborate to make sure that students were getting the help that they needed. I think another thing is, I think this kind of, we tend to kind of brush over this a little bit, but there were a lot of hurdles in just moving everything into online. I mean, I don't know how familiar all of you are with like the public school system, but it's a lot of paperwork and a lot of forms and a lot of like, you need physical signatures. And so we had to create so much from scratch. And there are so many new Google Docs and spreadsheets and websites and videos and like, I mean, everything had to be created new, and usually it had to be created really quickly. So, I mean, that was just like a really big change. I ended up putting a lot more of my time, I think, into like resource creation, just to make sure that like these things that are really, really crucial were in a place that students could access them when they're not in school. I think also just like working through there was just so, and there still is like this sort of sense of just being really overwhelmed, you know, by distance learning, by the pandemic, by racism and racial injustice. Like everything that happened this year was just like a fog, I think, that people had to kind of work through. And it was hard for me in some ways to like convince students that post-secondary planning is a priority and like you need to stay on topic and on task and keep that goal in mind. I think because of that difficulty in making sure that students were still planning for their future because they're still going to graduate even though everything is really difficult, I think I kind of like leaned on students a little bit more and was trying to stay open to a lot of different pathways. I think other coordinators probably felt that way too. It's like, I'm not going to pressure you into a four-year college like that. We have learned that these pathways need to be flexible. We need to have a lot of different, a lot of different pathways for students and offer a variety of support. So that is like a really small glimpse, I guess, into the ways that things changed. But yeah, I'm happy to answer more questions about that later on. Thank you, Kendra.
Yeah, thank you, Zoey. That was great. That was really helpful. Eric, I'm going to move to you now. Could you tell us about how did you see the changing world impacting students' hopes and plans for their post-high school lives?
Most definitely. Good afternoon, folks. Again, my name is Eric Rodgers. I'm a co-coordinator at Roosevelt High School, meaning I am fortunate enough to work alongside Amanda Justin, who is another co-coordinator at Roosevelt High School. To answer your question, Kendra, I think I can piggyback on a lot of the things that Zoey was talking about, because these are really connected questions. And Zoey, you mentioned the flexibility of plans, right? I think we talk a lot at Roosevelt about the big six, right? So there's 2-year college, 4-year college, apprenticeships are their own discrete plan, military is its own discrete plan, going straight to work is its own discrete plan, and employment, and gap year. Gap year is its own discrete plan, right? And there's intermixing in each of those, right? And Zoey was talking to that flexibility. I think we have even seen within the traditional quote unquote pathways, flexibility that is attempting to try and meet students where they are. And I think that's going to be the most important thing going forward. For instance, the fact that so many schools, even some very selective schools across the country, have moved to test optional, that is going to be something that institutions are going to need to reckon with going forward, right? It might communicate a certain thing to only be test optional during the pandemic, but once things quote unquote go back to normal, to all of a sudden require an ACT or SAT score. And as students are doing that planning, they're trying to be flexible. Zoey mentioned that it's kind of hard to convince some students that post-secondary planning is still important. And with regards to that point, some students have disengaged a little bit from that, but some students have also doubled down on their planning because that's their locus of control right now. And being able to look forward to something in the future has been important. Even in the midst of that, we have juniors that are thinking about, well, do I really need to take the ACT if I want to go to the University of Minnesota next year? And we're having advising conversations with them, kind of emphasizing like, maybe not, right? If you've been involved, if you have a strong GPA, that option might be just as accessible to you as if you had an ACT score. Looking at some of my notes as well. So yeah, students really have to cope with that uncertainty. I think the importance of literacy is going to be huge moving forward. And I don't just mean like linguistic literacy, but also digital literacy and media literacy. But the beautiful thing is that some of these skills are already kind of like interwoven into our students' everyday lives. Before the pandemic, before there were Google Meets and codified Zooms and things like that, kids were using Snapchat, kids were speaking to each other via FaceTime, right? So if post-secondary institutions or employers are trying to figure out how to create standards around that, they need to be intentional about leveraging what skills kids already have as they enter into that. With that said, navigating a website on your phone is not the same as navigating a website on a laptop. And some students need to be bolstered in that sort of digital literacy as well. Finally, just one of the notes that I have is that students want to and deserve to enter into post-secondary environments that see their identities as valuable, their lived experiences as expertise, and provide the tools necessary to nurture that, to nurture both their lived experiences and the expertise that they bring to these institutions. I think you see that even in students' admissions essays. Students want to talk about themselves and they want to go to a space where they're going to be honored and respected on the basis of who they are. So I'm hoping that as institutions are changing certain things like, are we going to be test optional or test blind? They're also thinking really, really intentionally about how are we going to respect students that come in, whether they've taken the test or not, with all of their identities in tow. And uplift them to use that as a platform to make change and make the future that they want for themselves.
That's great, thanks, Eric. And you actually hit on, I think, a couple of things that relate to this last question, which I'll pose to you both, and maybe Zoey could start and then Eric finish us out. But what are some of the lessons that you've learned from this year that you plan to take forward into what we hope will be a more normal year next year, although we'll see. But what are some of those lessons that will take us forward?
I also wrote some notes on this, and I didn't have this as a part of my note, but I just want to like double down on what Eric just said. And this isn't even necessarily a lesson for me, although it is. I hope I hope that this entire post-secondary landscape learns the lesson of seeing students as like an actual whole person, and acknowledging that these external factors like a global pandemic or like, you know, these other things that we have learned to adapt around. I mean, yeah, they affect students' lives, they affect students' academics, and like it matters. So yeah, so I just hope that that colleges, that jobs, that all of these different options for students are just like more open to seeing the humanity of our students, because it's worth it. But the things that I actually wrote down, I think that personally, I learned that just being consistent, being simple in my communication, is super important. And so I've really tried to pare down my messaging into like, this is what you need to know. And I'm definitely going to continue doing that next year, just having all my information in a consistent place. And then just hoping to continue the collaboration that we saw between departments, between social workers, career pathways coordinators, everyone involved in supporting our students, hoping that we can continue to stay flexible and collaborative.
Great, thank you, Zoe. And Eric, if you could kind of close out this portion for us.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Zoe in terms of the collaboration has been invaluable this year. I think it's been much more like in-house, right? We've had the opportunity to collaborate with counselors, with teachers, with different people within our school building, virtual school building, a lot more closely. Hopefully we can double down on that collaboration with our community organizations as we move forward. I appreciate what Zoe was saying about messaging too. Started the Roosevelt CCC website this year. That feels great, that there are really kind of like, oh, you need to know how to reset your STAR ID. Here's the link for that. You need to know what you need for your FAFSA. Here's a page where it lays out all of that stuff. Hopefully that will leave us more time for the sort of like abstract aspects of advising. Because the biggest lesson that I've learned is like those relationships are key. It's really hard to email a student that you've maybe only seen in the hallway once or twice and maybe only had like 1 or 2 conversations with and expect them to join a Google Meet with you with their camera on, showing their household, and have a conversation about post-secondary access. So next year, it's really going to be about kind of starting at square one and really just building relationships, because some of the efficient aspects of advising we have kind of onboarded onto a website, or we know how to communicate those things efficiently now.
That's great. Thanks, Eric. And now I think we're going to turn it over. I'm going to turn it back to Danielle, and we're going to have the Q&A portion.
Great, thank you so much. I think that there's a lot of great questions in the Q&A, and I'll get this moving. So, you know, kind of building on that, the point about students as whole people, what are students telling you about their experiences over the past year, and what has surprised you? So let's start out with, well, Eric, let's start with you. We'll mix it up.
Sure. We had an alumni panel at Roosevelt from some of our returning Roosevelt alums who joined a Zoom similar to this and spoke to students. A thing that surprised me and I really loved is that like the value of handwritten notes is still really important, which just feels good because I think students are experiencing so much screen fatigue, that to have some of our returning alums who are in college speak to like the value of doing things in quote unquote the old ways is still really helpful for them. In terms of current like seniors and juniors, kind of what Kendra and Zoe were speaking to in terms of the challenges of distance learning, in terms of the challenges of staying motivated to do some of the post-secondary planning. Again, there are students that are doubling down, but there are a lot of students that made an informed decision, whether or not they spoke to myself, Miss Amanda, or some of our other CCCs, to just go straight to work this year, because that is where they knew they could make an entry point and have a locus of control, despite the fact that they might have really, really lucrative options in terms of pursuing college or in terms of pursuing an apprenticeship. I think students are going with what they know and with what is familiar in the midst of this past year because there is so much uncertainty.
Great. Eric, we're getting a question about asking you to share what the big six are.
Yeah, the big six, that is not necessarily like nomenclature that is like used by Achieve. It's just something that was in my head as we talk about our post-secondary pathways available to students. So 2-year college, 4-year college, gap year, which we are intentional about saying is like a gap year program, maybe AmeriCorps, but some sort of like volunteering or service oriented thing. Straight to work is its own thing. So like saying that I'm just going to continue the same job that I've had in high school is its own thing in and of itself. Military, and then apprenticeship through like the trade union or skilled trades organization here in Minneapolis.
Great, thanks, Eric. Let's go back to thinking about like the student experience. And we all know we've been changed over the last year. And so I'm wondering if you guys could say a little bit about how students have changed. So I'll direct this one to Zoey.
Yeah, that's a hard one because I think that students are really varied with how they've changed. I mean, I think like I was thinking a lot about the first question, just like just generally what their experience has been like. And I think some students actually sort of thrived in this type of environment and realized that they liked being very independent. They liked, you know, kind of having their own schedule. So I think that, you know, I do think that that is a type of change, like learning that about yourself, especially if you're a senior and are kind of like going on to college or going on to whatever the next step is. I think that trying to also think about, yeah, how students have changed. I think I saw that at the beginning of distance learning, students were more willing to like pop into events like these and were, you know, more willing to engage in that way. I think that over the course of distance learning, I think students kind of found out what they did and did not want to engage in and started to prioritize their time, which is also like a really important thing to learn. But yeah, I mean, I think that we're going to be reflecting on how this year has impacted students' mental health, emotional health, you know, academic trajectory. Like, I think it's a hard question to answer because students have changed in so many ways. So.
Thanks, Zoey. Eric, do you want to share anything about how you think students have changed?
I think Zoe covered a lot of it, and I really do want to lean into what she was saying about like students are really varied. So there are students this year, especially here within the Twin Cities, that have found a voice in the activism that has happened, given some of the racial incidents that have happened within our city. And they have really found a platform and found purpose and found momentum in taking part in those activities throughout the Twin Cities. I think, and as a result of that, students are looking at our institutions, the institutions that they attend, a little bit more closely as well, and asking certain questions of them. I think with that said, there are students that are in positions where their mental health has really been affected, where they're entering into Google Classrooms, not turning on their cameras because they don't see other students with their cameras on, and it's making them anxious to kind of be the first one to do that. But at the same time, especially now being back in the building, the sort of like awkward joy that happens when students see each other again, it puts them back into like, oh yeah, I'm a teenager in high school. Life does not just exist, you know, with me sitting behind a computer screen has been really, really refreshing. With that said, though, I think, like Zoe was saying, there's still going to be a lot to observe and take note of as we move forward, because I don't think the changes have been spelled out just in the midst of this year.
Yeah, Eric, you mentioned students going back into classrooms in person in real life, but right now about half of students are back in person learning and the other half are still virtual. So how are you balancing the virtual and in-person support, and how is that working?
Yeah, just really quickly, when we are in the building, we can find kids and we can pull them. We've typically been a drop-in center. So because there are like stipulations around how kids are moving through spaces, which in and of itself is really odd and strange when there are like, you can only walk on this side of the hallway going in this direction, or this side of the hallway, or this is an upstairs case and this is a downstairs case. Just the time it takes to move through the building is different. But it's been nice to be able to see a kid in the hallway and be like, hey, you need to stop by the CCC so we can do your FAFSA. And because we only have half the students back, we don't have that consistent drop in. So during that time, when it might be quieter in the CCC, we have more time to like send an email to a kid and try and meet them in a Google Meet. But we're doing both. We're doing in-person, physically distanced with the masks on meetings. And we might do that from 12:30 to 1 and then have a 1 o'clock with a student on a Google Meet.
Great. So I'm going to direct this next question to Kendra, actually. So the question is, crises also often present opportunities to cut bureaucracy and make needed changes more quickly. So do you have any examples of new strategies that we've had to implement that are going to be retained going forward because they've ended up being improvements?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think that in terms of I do think that all of us becoming more digitally literate has been a good thing. And that goes, I think, for us at the staff level, as well as at the school level, as, Eric and Zoe have spoken to a bit. I think coordinators, they've already talked about in the future, not all meetings do have to be in person. Maybe a student would be, more comfortable meeting in the afternoon on a Zoom or something like that. Or we do have coordinators who are working in 2 schools, for example, who before they were only available on Monday, Tuesday for the students in this school and only available Thursday, Friday for the other students. And now virtually they can be available. It can be more fluid than that, and they can be more available when students need them. So there's things like that at the student level. I think for us, we really are thinking about like time a bit differently and how we are prioritizing our physical presence and making our time more efficient. So we're thinking about our meeting structures next year. We're thinking about how are we, because we are all spread out across Minneapolis and St. Paul. And so when do we actually bring our bodies together to have some time together as a team? And when do we just need to kind of like put our virtual heads together so that we can prioritize our time out at schools with students? And then similarly, our career events, we had to move all virtual this year and recorded everything as virtual career panels, which I think had benefits and drawbacks. But one of the benefits is that we now have these resources that can be used throughout the year. A student doesn't have to be available like during this particular day at this particular time at this particular school. Instead, there's this resource that's available for students across the entire district or across both districts. So that's something that I think we're going to lean into a bit more as well, thinking strategically about what is a live event in a particular place and what is a resource we're creating for everyone to access.
Great, thanks, Kendra. I'd also add, as far as another innovation that we had to do was related to on our Step Up program, and that we had to take workforce readiness training virtual. And we had to do it on the fly last year because as the state shut down, we were expecting about 500 kids all in person that Saturday. So we had to figure out a way to put that online. And what I like about that is that hopefully we'll continue to have some sort of hybrid or have an option in the future for that online training, because sometimes that Saturday training that students have to go through can be a barrier if they have other family commitments, other work commitments. So, I think that's something that we're also going to keep as a new innovation. So shifting back to talking about kind of our changing landscape, we all know that the working world is changing, and the job market is changing as we have all been infected by COVID. So this goes back to both Eric and Zoey, and maybe we'll start out with Zoey. How are you dealing with changing demands in the job market and helping kids adapt to it and get excited about it? And then tagging on to this, how do we talk to students about entrepreneurial spirit and how they can build a career with entrepreneurship? So kind of a blended question there, but just thinking about, like, as we're talking about careers, how are we seeing things being changed by COVID? Mm-hmm. So Zoey.
Yeah, I mean, so I think the job market has been all over the place throughout this pandemic. And I think it particularly affected sort of short-term job opportunities for students, like in terms of like working in the service industry or in restaurants or a lot of retail, or, you know, those jobs that high schoolers are often getting just like were no longer available. And a lot of internship programs, like, you know, we had sort of STEM internship programs or other internships were either virtual or not happening at all. So trying to direct students to other opportunities as they came up. I mean, it really was like, I would receive an email and be like, okay, like this is completely different this year. And I would share that with students. So I just, again, had to be really flexible and share that with our students. I think in terms of like the career sort of pathways and the long-term job market, I think just sort of like I said before, really telling students that, you know, they should be thinking about what type of a career and what type of like a long-term pathway are they looking at, and then thinking of what training, if any, they need to get there. So, you know, does that mean a shorter term certificate program? Does that mean like a free training, like something from Summit Academy? Or does that mean a 4-year or a master's degree? So just like really emphasizing the career pathway and then talking about the tools to get there. Because I think that, like, rather than focusing on, you know, a 4-year degree or, you know, one of those more structured pathways, allows the student to be more adaptable. Because I think if anything, like this year has just told us that we need to be prepared to change our plans at any time. So if you have a set career pathway, then you can bring in the tools to get there as they're available. So I'll let Eric maybe answer the second part about entrepreneurship.
Any thoughts on entrepreneurship, Eric?
Sure. I do kind of want to speak to something that Zoey said too, that I've kind of been trying to refine this message to students that are maybe bound for a 2 or 4-year college. I think we know, like research says, that, like, you know, young people are changing their careers often sometimes after they graduate, right? And I think sometimes, especially like juniors, I've noticed, have felt this pressure, and some seniors have this trepidation around, like, well, should I apply for a college if I don't know what I want to do? And if a student has a GPA, if they've had a level of academic confidence and proficiency that says that they would be successful in college, I try to encourage students to do that, simply because with the messaging that, like, your college major should not necessarily be looked at like your hard and fast career pathway, but a lens through which that you start to analyze the problems of the world or assess your interests or things like that. The example I always use is, I was a psych major. I'm clearly not doing clinical psychology, but that background comes into mind when I'm talking with kids. That background also comes into mind when I'm enjoying like a video game, because I'm thinking of, well, why did the developers choose to add this mechanic? How is that getting players more engaged? Things like that. So if students can start to think of the things that they are studying more creatively, it lends exactly to what Zoey is talking about in terms of that career adaptability. In terms of entrepreneurship, that is a challenging one to answer, because I think that is heavily dependent upon our technological environment. I think we are living in a day and age where there are explicit conversations about individuals who set up their profiles as brands, right? And that's a hard conversation, I think, to have with a young person at 15, 16, 17, and even 18 that knows the ropes of social media, maybe knows how to get followers, but might not know how to set up their account as a brand through which they can either sell a product or sell a personality. I think we are going to get into, I think that interest needs to be identified in students and definitely nurtured. I also think that there needs to be conversations with students around, like, I think back when I was in high school, it's like, if you played basketball, you thought you was going to the NBA, even though like a fraction of a % of people go pro. And to be perfectly honest, similar conversations need to be had around like becoming a YouTuber with millions of followers that can do YouTube for their entire career, right? And as somebody that watches a lot of YouTube, there are a lot of people that are self-taught and are highly motivated and learn the skills of editing videos and getting equipment in order to make that a career. And I think there is a very realistic and grounded conversation that needs to happen with students. There is, which is one thing, there is a need for us to become better informed around that, because that is just an area of business and entrepreneurship that is like new, quite frankly, right? Like there is no formula to becoming an Instagram influencer. Yeah, that's a difficult question to answer, but I hope that maybe gets at some of the pillars that I'm thinking about as I kind of approach those conversations with young folks.
Thanks. One more question before we close, and I'm going to direct this one to Zoey. So we have a one of our post-secondary partner student advisors with us, and they're wondering, what do we think freshmen, our students who are graduating this spring and are going to be enrolling in post-secondary, what do we think they're going to need from their advisors when we're handing them off to these other advisors, right? And what are they going to need different? What's different that they're going to need than you think in previous years? So I'll let Zoey take this one.
Yeah, I saw that question roll in, and I've been thinking about it a lot. I mean, I don't even know if it's different resources. I think it's just more, because I think so many students have not had the opportunity to visit campus and, go to those like 3 or 4 different information sessions and guided college tours and, in-person orientations and all of those different events where they're building the information that they have about a college or about a post-secondary option. I mean, yes, there were webinars and some were really great, but like we've said, I think a lot of students have really struggled to actually pull information from those webinars. So I would say just like really, students might need several campus tours. They might need to be told multiple times where their advisors are, where their support systems are, and just like making sure that students have those connections. Again, I don't think it's necessarily different than in past years, but just acknowledging that, like, for example, most, if not all colleges have like an international student orientation week where they're taking students like maybe around parts of the city or around parts of the campus that like they haven't been to at all. Something like that might need to happen for every student, just to get them back into like being in a physical campus and showing them how to find resources.
Great, thanks for that. I'm seeing Eric nodding, so I think he's agreeing. And with that, I want to thank Kendra, Zoey, and Eric for making the time to be with us today. I want everyone to understand, like at the end of the school year, this is a really busy time for these folks, and we really appreciate the time that you took to answer questions and share with us today. All of you out there, if you are wondering how you can get involved in our work, there are lots of ways to engage with Achieve Minneapolis and support our young people. So first of all, we're always looking for volunteers. So we'll be looking for volunteers this fall to participate in our career events in Minneapolis and St. Paul high schools. So keep an eye on our website and your emails this summer for details later on. Second, please reach out to us for details on how you can hire an intern with Step Up or our Achieve College Internship program. We're pretty set for this summer because we've done the placements for the most part, but we're always looking for more partners and more internships, and it's not too early to be thinking about that for next year. Third, we've got a great Ed Talks conversation coming up on June 14th. It will feature Makisha Nation, and then 4 young speakers from the Youth Leadership Initiative, and they'll all be talking about the power of youth voice and leadership. And so I'm really excited for this upcoming Ed Talks. You can register on our website, which you can see on our screen is AchieveMpls.org. And also save the date for our October 14th Evening of Excellence. It's our annual event. It features our staff, students, alumni, and community leaders. We're having a house party again this year, so it will once again be online due to concerns about being able to limit the number of participants. So as always, please help us spread the word about Achieve. We, of course, welcome your financial support. Gifts of any size are truly appreciated and keep our career and college readiness programs strong. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you have any other questions, please get in touch with any of us. Here are our email addresses on the screen, and I believe we'll keep them up for a few minutes. But please get in touch with us if you have any questions or want to offer us any ideas or feedback. So thank you so much for joining us.